Generic subjective continuity is the claim that consciousness is subjectively eternal, and that our deaths will be followed with consciousness of some sort. This can be seen as a direct challenge to the common atheist view of eternal nothingness after death. Today I will try to explain this seemingly outlandish claim in 4 different ways. But first, let's clarify one thing. Nothingness, as a state that can be experienced, is an oxymoron. There cannot be an experience of no experience. Thinking of non-existence as an experience of black only is a logical contradiction. Nothingness cannot exist, and if a conscious being ever undergoes a gap in consciousness, then that gap is skipped from a subjective point of view, and the next occurrence of consciousness follows immediately. But why do I believe that conscious experience is essentially eternal? Let's start with what I consider the easiest way of explaining it. Before birth, we didn't exist, yet somehow that non-existence discontinued. In other words, we went from a state of non-existence to a state of existence. After we die, we'll no longer exist once again, just like we didn't exist in, say, 1810. But why would one expect that this time the non-existence will be permanent? What's the difference between the non-existence before birth and the non-existence after death that makes one expect it to not discontinue again? Imagine you are the only conscious mind in the universe. One day, unsurprisingly, you die. Now imagine that 1,000,000 years later, another mind comes into existence. As there is no other experience to be had, this is what follows your death. A possibly much clearer way of demonstrating this is Tom Clark's transformation thought experiment. One is to imagine that a skilled brain surgeon performs a tiny alterance in a patient's character, like a different taste in music, for example. The patient would still be recognizable as who he was before the operation, and few people would argue that we are dealing with a different person now. But let's imagine that more and more of these small operations were performed until the patient isn't recognizable as the person from before the operation anymore. We could say that the person from before the operation doesn't exist anymore. Tom Clark calls this death by transformation. However, this death by transformation doesn't plunge us into a black void, as the patient does not have a subjective experience of the gaps between any of the alterations. There therefore remains a continuous stream of consciousness being experienced. He then asks us what the difference is between death by transformation and regular death that would somehow make us expect something else after it. The third way of explaining generic subjective continuity is a lot more complicated to explain, but I consider it to be very simple in its core. I am making the claim that consciousness is the same for everyone. There are no different versions of it. Either you are conscious or you are not. Just like you would either be pregnant or not. You can't be more pregnant than someone else. In the same sense, you can't be more conscious than someone else. Either you are or you are not. Of course, everything else can be different. Memories can be different, our sense organs, our bodies, our point of view, etc. But our core consciousnesses are the same. One could say that we are all the same someone, which is also known as open individualism. I will demonstrate this with a little thought experiment. Imagine that you, dear listener, and I both had our consciousnesses surgically removed and swapped. Everything else, like our memories, remained untouched. Would the situation have changed in any meaningful way? I think not. We would still be the same people with the same perception of reality. This thought experiment has one premise, of course, that consciousness is a function of the brain and that it is separate from things like memories. And this premise could, of course, be disputed. But if you do accept it, then I think that open individualism follows logically. To bring this back to generic subjective continuity, this would mean that while enter your name here does cease to exist upon your death, other consciousnesses do continue to exist. And as they are exactly the same, that's what follows your death. As we have already established that non-experience cannot be experienced, the only thing that can be experienced is that of those that still exist. Many people reject this third explanation as they believe that there is something special about each and every one of us, something that makes us, us, a soul if you like. I want to show you that even then generic subjective continuity would apply. For this, I want to briefly explain the infinite monkey theorem to you. The infinite monkey theorem states that if you place a monkey behind a typewriter and let him randomly hit on the keys for an infinite amount of time, he will eventually end up writing any particular text, like all the works of Shakespeare or the Bible. This means that if you die and your body rots, it is still possible for the atoms that formed your live body at one point to get together again and form you once again. We know that the material that once formed you is still around, and we know that it is logically possible for you to exist, as you did exist in the past. So if we add infinite time in the mix, it becomes a guarantee that you will exist again. Technically speaking, this would be personal subjective continuity rather than generic subjective continuity, as we are talking about a specific individual coming into existence again. But as both of these philosophies boil down to the same thing, namely that death is followed by consciousness of some sort, I think it qualifies as a way to explain generic subjective continuity.